Welcome back to the Death Channel. I don't know about you, but for me an ideal day out entails going out to have a look at some preserved human remains. So, with that in mind, here's a list of 15 preserved body parts of famous people, some of which you can still visit today. Number 1. Percy Bysshe Shelley's heart and a lock of his hair. The English poet Percy Bysshe Shelley drowned and was cremated on an Italian beach where his body washed ashore, which for a romantic was a rather excellent if extremely unpleasant way to die. Lord Byron, Leigh Hunt and Edward Trelawney attended the cremation, which was immortalised in this painting by Louis Edouard Fournier. During the burning, Byron asked Trelawney for Shelley's skull, but Trelawney refused to give it over because he suspected Byron was going to add Shelley's cranium to his collection of human skull drinking cups. Next, they were all shocked when Shelley's heart did not burn. Trelawney reached into the fire and retrieved the heart, severely injuring his hand in the process. He gave the heart to Hunt, who later passed it to Mary Shelley. You have to wonder if she was ever tempted by the thought of popping it into our infamous monster and bringing her husband back from the dead. In any case, she preserved it in a silken shroud and carried it with her for the rest of her life. When their son Percy died, the heart was placed in a silver case and buried with him. Claire Clairmont, a close friend and likely mistress, also kept a lock of Shelley's hair in a red box in her Florence apartment. Number 2. Henry Grey's head. Henry Grey, Duke of Suffolk and father of the 9-day Queen Lady Jane Grey, was executed in 1554. Reverend Samuel Kins, in an 1889 publication, recounts that Henry's body was buried in the chapel of St. Peter after his execution, but his head was reportedly smuggled out and buried at the Church of Holy Trinity Minories. In 1851, William Legge, 5th Earl of Dartmouth, discovered a basket in a small vault near the church altar while inspecting his ancestors' vaults. The basket, filled with sawdust, contained a perfectly preserved decapitated male head, almost certainly that of Henry Grey. This mummified head is now displayed in a glass-top box in the vestry of St. Botolph Aldgate in London. Number 3. Louis XIV's heart. During the French Revolution, the tomb of Louis XIV was desecrated, and his heart was stolen. It was then sold to British Lord Harcourt, who later resold it to the Dean of Westminster, the Very Reverend William Buckland. Buckland, infamous for experimenting with unusual foods, famously ate the embalmed heart at a dinner party. Number 4. Sir Walter Raleigh's head. Sir Walter Raleigh was a poet, soldier, and favourite of Elizabeth I. He was executed just over 400 years ago after being convicted of plotting against James I. Legend says Raleigh's widow, Bess Throgmorton, was so heartbroken that she had his head embalmed and kept it with her in a bag for the rest of her life. Accounts of his beheading at Westminster Palace on October 29, 1618, describe how his head was placed in a red bag and taken away by his widow in a mourning coach. While his body was buried in St. Margaret's Church in Westminster, the fate of his head remained uncertain. On the eve of the 400th anniversary of his execution, a red silk velvet bag was discovered in the attic of West Horsley Place, once the home of Raleigh's son, Carew. Some believe this bag, found with his embalmed head, was used by Bess. However, others dismiss this, noting the original records mentioned a red leather bag, not silk. Regardless, Bess was known for carrying her husband's head around to help restore his reputation. Whether she used it like a ventriloquist's dummy or not is best left to the imagination. Number 5. Napoleon's hair, heart, stomach, wisdom tooth, intestines and penis. After Napoleon's death in 1821, his head was shaved and the hair was kept as souvenirs by many. In 1817, he had a painful wisdom tooth removed, which was later found among Dr. O'Meara's belongings and sold for 72 guineas. Napoleon's heart was placed in a silver vase and his stomach in a silver pepper pot. Part of his intestines ended up at the Royal College of Surgeons, but was destroyed in a 1940 air raid. On his deathbed, he requested his heart be preserved in spirits of wine for dear Marie Louise. In 1972, his 1-inch long penis, described as, quote, a small dried up object and looking like a seahorse, was offered for sale at Christie's but did not meet the reserve price. It was said to have been obtained by Napoleon's confessor priest. Number 6. Joaquin Murrieta's head. Joaquin Murrieta, a Mexican bandit in California, became a legendary figure. He and his partner, known as Three-Fingered Jack, robbed stagecoaches and mining camps. The California governor placed a $1,000 bounty on Murrieta's head. Captain Harry Love, a Texas Ranger, vowed to capture him. After several failed attempts, Captain Love returned with a head he claimed was Murrieta's and the severed hand of Three-Fingered Jack, both of which he had preserved in alcohol. Authorities auctioned the head and hand for $36, and the buyer exhibited them to paying customers in Stockton and other locations. Number 7. Oliver Cromwell's head. Oliver Cromwell received a grand funeral and was buried in Westminster Abbey. However, just over 2 years later, his body was exhumed, dragged to Tyburn, and hung until sunset, which just goes to show you can never please everyone in the world of politics. The executioner then decapitated Cromwell, needing 8 strikes to sever the head, bending his embalmed nose in the process. His body was thrown into a pit, while the head was placed on a 25-foot pole and displayed on the roof of Westminster Hall for 24 years. In 1685, a storm knocked it down, and a guard captain secretly took it home, hiding it in his chimney. Before his death, he passed it to his daughter, which would have been quite an unusual gift. By 1710, the head was being shown in a travelling freak show. It was labelled the Monster's Head and was up for sale, valued at 60 guineas. Actor Samuel Russell acquired it in 1775 and offered it to Sydney Sussex College, where Cromwell had studied, but they declined. Russell paid his rent by showing it for a small fee. In 1787, he sold it for £118 to jeweller James Fox, who later sold it for a rather princely £230 to a syndicate of 3 entrepreneurs who exhibited it in Bond Street, London. But people had become mildly more squeamish by then, as the show flopped miserably. By 1814, the syndicate members had all died mysteriously, and the head was sold to a Dr. Wilkinson, whose family kept it wrapped in silk in an oak box. In 1960, the Wilkinson family offered it again to Sydney Sussex College, which this time accepted it and gave it a secret burial on the college grounds. Number 8. Sir Thomas More's head. Sir Thomas More was a prominent English lawyer, judge, social philosopher, author, statesman, amateur theologian, and Renaissance humanist. He also had a knack of getting right on the nerves of very powerful people like kings. He served as Lord High Chancellor of England under Henry VIII from October 1529 to May 1532. However, his refusal to attend Anne Boleyn's coronation led Henry VIII to deem him a traitor and condemn him to death. After his execution, More's head was parboiled, placed on a pole, and displayed on London Bridge. A month later, his daughter Margaret Roper bribed the bridge keepers to retrieve the head. The keeper shimmied up the pole and threw her dad's head down to her, which she caught and smuggled home. She preserved it in a lead box with fragrant spices inside, which probably didn't help the smell an awful lot. Despite being betrayed by the keeper and briefly imprisoned, Margaret insisted, "My father's head should not be food for fishes." After her death in 1544, the head was buried with her. In June 1824, her vault was opened, and the head was displayed at St Dunstan's Church in Canterbury, where it remained until fairly recently. Number 9. Charles I's fourth cervical vertebra. Charles I of England is a figure whose relics are highly prized, second only to Marie Antoinette. A handkerchief soaked in his blood was even auctioned in the year 2008. After his execution in 1649, Charles I was buried in Windsor Castle alongside Henry VIII. The coffins were lost for many years until 1813, when Charles's coffin was accidentally found in St. George's Chapel at Windsor. George IV, then Prince Regent, had the coffin opened in the presence of several notable men, including Sir Henry Halford, a physician to 4 British sovereigns. After examining the well-preserved remains, they resealed the coffin but overlooked a piece of the 4th cervical vertebra, which remained outside. George IV presented the bone to Sir Henry, who encased it in a linum vitae box lined with gold and inscribed in Latin. Sir Henry often shocked guests by using the vertebra as a salt holder at dinner parties. Eventually, Queen Victoria ordered the bone to be returned to Charles's coffin. Number 10. Nicolas Vaubrin's heart. Nicolas Bautru, Marquis de Vaubrin, died in the Battle of Altenheim on August 1, 1675, during the Franco-Dutch War. The French army, led by Vaubrin and the Comte de Lorge, clashed with an imperial army commanded by Raimondo Montecuccoli. Vaubrin was killed during a cavalry charge that recaptured a bridge. His widow had his heart embalmed and placed in a glass case. She spent 7 hours a day for the next 29 years staring at it until her death in 1704. After her passing, the heart was removed from the castle of Serent, but all his other belongings remained untouched. Number 11. Peter the Great's mistress's head. Mary Hamilton belonged to the Scottish Hamilton family, who had moved to Russia during the reign of Tsar Ivan the Terrible. In 1713, she became a lady-in-waiting to Empress Catherine and became Tsar Peter's lover. She also had an affair with a man named Ivan Mikhailovich Orlov. When Orlov betrayed her with Peter's other lover, Avdotia Chernysheva, she tried to win him back with gifts stolen from Catherine. In 1715, she had an abortion using medicine for constipation, and in 1717, after secretly giving birth, she drowned the baby. Orlov was questioned about some of Peter's missing documents. He admitted his affair with Hamilton and implicated her in the abortion. Avdotia Chernysheva accused Hamilton of spreading rumours that Catherine ate wax to keep her skin pale. A search of Hamilton's room revealed stolen items belonging to Catherine. Both Hamilton and Orlov were arrested and imprisoned in the fortress of St. Petersburg. Hamilton confessed to theft and killing her newborn, but refused to testify against Orlov despite being tortured, and the fact that he had betrayed her. In November 1718, Mary Hamilton was sentenced to death. Empress Catherine and Tsarina Praskovia Saltykova pleaded for mercy, but Peter refused. On March 14, 1719, she was executed dressed in white by decapitation with a sword rather than an axe. As Peter had promised, she would not be touched by the executioner. After the execution, Peter picked up the gory head, gave a lecture on its anatomy, and then kissed it. Still, he loved her and wanted her near. So he apparently preserved her head in a jar of alcohol and set it in his bedroom as a reminder of her loveliness and as a warning to his other mistresses. Number 12. James Garfield's spine. President James A. Garfield was shot twice on July 2, 1881, and survived for 80 days before dying from sepsis. His death might have been avoided if not for the contamination of his wounds either from the gunshots or subsequent medical interventions. "Yes, I shot the president," said Charles Guiteau, Garfield's assassin, "but his physicians killed him." The drama of Garfield's struggle sent the nation into a frenzy. D. Willard Bliss, a former Civil War surgeon, and his chosen consultants were under intense scrutiny from both fellow doctors and the public. As Garfield's condition worsened, people were rather upset, especially due to the fact Bliss didn't bother to wash his hands before probing Garfield's wounds. The National Museum of Health and Medicine in Silver Spring, Maryland, holds a piece of Garfield's spine, removed during his autopsy, as a memento. Number 13. Charles Guiteau's brain. We've already heard about the spine of President Garfield, but his assassin also had bits of his body on display. Guiteau, clearly mentally ill even by 19th century standards, was convicted of murder in January 1882, just days before the one-year anniversary of his attack on Garfield. Before his execution, he recited a poem titled, "I am going to the Lordy." That said, as a convicted murderer, he probably was not going to the Lordy. Afterward, the executioner placed a hood over Gitto's face and a noose around his neck. Gitto held onto the poem and dropped it when ready, signalling the executioner to open the trapdoor and break his neck. His body was buried in the jail yard, later disinterred, and sent to what became the National Museum of Health and Medicine. His brain along with his enlarged spleen was preserved, and his brain is now at the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Number 14. Anne Boleyn's heart. After the execution of Sir Thomas More, one might expect Henry VIII to protect Anne Boleyn, but she soon faced the same fate. Most people associate Anne with her beheaded head, but her heart has an even more intriguing story. Following her execution, her heart was removed, likely due to an ancient burial custom. Some believe Henry requested its removal to keep it close, despite her body's unceremonious burial at the Tower of London. During mid-1800s renovations at St Mary's Church in Irwerton, a heart-shaped tin casket was found in the chancel wall. The church clerk recounted a story passed down through generations that Queen Anne's heart was buried there according to her wishes. The casket, containing only dust that may have been her heart, was reburied under the organ, with a plaque marking it as the probable resting place of Anne Boleyn's heart. Number 15. Jeremy Bentham's head. Jeremy Bentham was a philosopher and radical known for his doctrine of utilitarianism. Upon his death in 1832, Bentham requested that his body be dissected. 3 days after his death, his friend Southwood Smith dissected his body at the Webb Street School of Anatomy and Medicine during a thunderstorm. Bentham wanted his skeleton preserved and dressed in his clothes. With his head mummified and fitted with a pair of glass eyes he carried around with him before his death. The mummification process failed, and so a wax head was made instead. His skeleton was stuffed, dressed in his clothes, and the wax head was attached. In 1939, his body was restored and cleaned. Bentham's mummified head, which reportedly smells of beef jerky, was once displayed, but is now kept in a wooden box in UCL's Institute of Archaeology due to its delicate state and the disturbances it caused. In the 1970s, students from King's College stole the head and demanded a £100 ransom, which UCL negotiated to a £10 charity donation before the head was returned. Rumours about the head being used as a football or found in a luggage locker have abounded ever since. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Death Channel. In future, I might make a longer video on some of these morbidly fascinating topics. Why not leave me a comment and let me know which one you like best? Until then, see you on the other side.